Hi folks, Professor Diffley, History 100, Chapter 9, Lecture Video 3. Excuse me, so we're in the life of medieval Europe here. Taking a look at this. So there's, this is covered in the text. I add some more stuff in here, so make sure you take a look at the notes and all that. This is a picture of a well-to-do medieval village. You can tell just by the houses and everything they have here. One of the first things is a showing of the three field crop rotation. This is a innovation during this era that increases farm agriculture outtake. It is somewhat counterintuitive because in order to do so, you divide your fields into three and you always leave one fallow. Fallow means not in use, and you rotate it each year. Why do you do it that way? This way you allow the field to the soil to replenish itself. This is going to take hold in Western Europe. It's going to take a while to take everywhere because it is kind of risky because you're literally cutting your growing fields by a third. But you got to look long term here. So medieval life, feudalism. I divide it into feudalism as just for, I mean, they kind of go together. But for this course here, we're going to divide it in these two ways. Feudalism as the political system, manorialism as the economic system. You can see here one of the things after the decline of the Viking, and there's videos on that. These groups that come in, it's going to divide up the empire, and people are going to retreat to decentralized local rule, especially in manors and the feudal system, where they lords will watch over certain areas for protection. And you can see the definitions here as we're going to get through. One thing here, though, a note: a peasant and a serf. A little clarification on this. So, a peasant is a free person, farmer. Usually, a peasant usually means a poor, subsistence farmer. A serf in exchange is different here because serfs is a perpetual obligation, right? This is you're tied to the land. You're part of it. Peasants can enter into these dependent relationships with nobles and lords, but it's by choice. Serfs, this is something that they have, right? Their parents were serfs. They're going to be serfs, that sort of thing. They're going to be tied to the land, not allowed to leave, but something to their lord. So let's look at this feudal system. King awarded lands, grants as our fiefs to his most important vassals. So this is very similar in many ways, or somewhat similar to the patron-client system. This is a system where you could be a vassal to a king, but the vassal is a lord and can have his own vassals there. The fief is the large piece of land. And why they do this? Partly in this system, and it's too hard to control all this territory at the time, and it also buys the loyalty of these lords there. Kings, vassals were the nobles, lords, ladies, barons, knights, bishops. Everybody could be part of this. Women could be part of this system. And in turn, a noble vassal could also own his peasants and its serfs. And it's mutual obligations to each other. Protection for the and use of certain facilities for the peasants. Peasants work for the lord in return for that access to those services and protection specifically. And again, they would the vassals would, especially the noble ones, contribute soldiers for the king's armies. And they swore an oath of fealty, fidelity, fides, going back to the Romans where we start here, and that is the fealty. You pay homage by giving certain taxes and other things to people here. And the way this was done, the enfeoffment ceremony, you actually still find a lot of this in land contracts today. The way the enfeoffment ceremony would be is, it's enfeoffment is taking over the fief. Today it's called the fee in land contracts, especially here in Massachusetts. The way this worked, this is a public ceremony. What often happen is the lord with the vassal would do is they would take a piece of land, dirt, and put it in the vassal's hands, and now they would be seized of the land, what we call seizin today, S-E-I-S-E-N. Means you're in possession of the land there. And this is so that everybody knows that there's a relationship between them now, and they now have control of the land. We still use these terms today, even though they're incredibly outdated. Mostly just keep lawyers employed. It's just tradition, but you could see that. So this was, again, a mutual obligation system. Again, think the Roman patron-client system before. Manoralism here is for safety and defense. They would come into these around the manor. The manor would be the lord's manor. They're the landlord. They would have their manor house or castle. Everybody around them for safety and defense form these communities. They were called the manor. The manoralism is the economic system. It's really agriculture, land divided up into self-sufficient manors. Again, they had to have everything they needed. Without the connection, it was very dangerous to travel the roads. Less trade because of bandits and all that. And so people paid rent at this point in usually in labor and farm goods in exchange for protection and justice, that sort of thing. Usually people bartered. You don't have a lot of a cash economy yet. We're actually going to see that in the commercial revolution coming in the next chapter there. What did the manor look like, though? Here again, it consisted of the castle or the manor house, the church, the village, and surrounding farmlands. So we'll see some more of these here, but the manor was the central part of their lives in many ways. The manor lord is often a member of the nobility or Catholic hierarchy, bishops and cardinals. They controlled land and turned the labor of their vassals and or serfs. There's various names: liege, liegeor, seigneur, baron, count, duke, duchess, and these are going to vary over time, just like everything else. There's a hierarchy amongst them, too. Here's another depiction of a manor. You can see these in the regular slides. There's some notes, and you could read that a little bit more and look in detail. This would be a one with a manor house rather than a castle. Here again, you can see the manor house. There, the divided lands, the fallow fields, blacksmith, the lord's oven, the mill, things that they would use, maybe sometimes pay tax for, but as part of it. And you can see again here, you have common lands. You have, and this is like the orange ones here are lands cultivated for the lord, right? So this is how they're paying their taxes, their rents, so to speak, and divide them. There's common lands for them to use, that sort of thing. Again, another depiction of this. This one's from England in around 1100, and you can see some of the similarities. We talked about the three field, just how these towns were divided up. You can see there was often shops would be in one area, homes would be in another area. And you can get an idea of what's going on here. Here's a castle. One of the interesting things, people are always fascinated with castles, and we usually through Disney movies and things like that. While they were definitely better than some of the living situations many people had back then, they're not exactly the nicest today. They're dark, damp, cold. Very little light gets through because they're also for defense. You often had tapestries on walls, which acted like a sort of insulation, but also to soak up water that would seep through the stones, things like that. And then they were often surrounded by moats for defense. But as you can see here, this is from a BBC website. The bad thing you could they add in where the human waste is going. So these things didn't smell the great. I mean, compared to the way they are today, these would be very low standard housing compared to what we have in the modern world. But again, offer protection. Things like that. But these manors were isolated. Again, there was very little connection. The roads were unsafe. It's going to change when you have peddlers, pilgrims, or soldiers, moving through these areas between different fiefdoms. Again, like I said, they had to be self-sufficient. Basic needs had to be there. These are some images from recreated ones: a mill, a bakehouse, a blacksmith, and these are really important parts there. They were often owned by the manor lord, and peasants paid a tax or fee to use them. And these were often paid. These specialized trades were often passed down by families later. This is the origins of some names like Smith, Miller, Baker, Taylor, Tanner. These kinds of things, and not always, but this is often the origins of these names. So looking at the social classes there, they could be divided during the Middle Ages into three major castes. Again, the difference between a class and a caste. Caste, you're sort of born into, you're stuck into. Class implies mobility. But they did. Those who fought, those who prayed, those who worked. Three very broad classes here. Those who fought were the nobles and the knights, the highest rank. Again, you had lesser vassals there. Hierarchy amongst the nobility. Ignore that V there. That's a typo. That should have been taken out. Many vassals became powerful that the kings had difficulty to control them. These are Castellans. Castellans are any had a castle. Anybody could have a castle and have defense. These are all part of those who fought. The peasants are going to fight too, but these are the elite soldiers, horseback, armored, what you think of as knights. You can see the colors of the wealthy class, very colorful compared to the lower classes because they can afford it. Also they have the silk stockings. It also implies that they don't work, right? Because you imagine working in a muddy field and all this. Here's a medieval lord or knight that you see here. More of the knight's armor. We'll talk about chivalry and all that later in chapters, so we'll deal with that. But these are some depictions. These are actually ancient knights. This is from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. You can see some of the armor here for the knights. Warriors in warfare. Again, the knights were powerful, horseback warriors. We often have this idea of them. We're very romanticized, and again, we'll see that in later chapters here. It's often, it's very, again, romantic. How do we know? They had to have all these efforts to contain violence, the peace of God, truce of God. You can see in the notes and the text, more or less threatening excommunication and other punishments for people who preyed upon the weak. And that's really what their goals are, is to keep the powerful from preying on the weak. Knights were not always the way we like to imagine them as, very chivalrous or very good. They often caused lots of damage in their warfare. Part of the also problem here is primogeniture in the patrilineal family. Primogeniture was a system where only the first male son could inherit from the father. So you have multiple sons. Only the first one was able to take the inheritance. So then you have others who would then have to strike out. Some of them are going to buy church offices, and some of them are going to become knights or these youths. That can never really establish themselves, and that's going to create all sorts of problems. We have these aimless men and warriors who can't really go anywhere. The prayed were the leaders, religious leaders. You had the bishops. They were wealthy and often came from the noble families. Again, with primogeniture, many in the church allowed the church offices of bishop and cardinal to be sold to families so that you could pass it down. Which, obviously you can see some of the problems with that. But they're going to rule over parishes called dioceses, again, a holdover from the Roman eras. They were part of the feudal system in many ways. They had their own fiefs, their own peasants, and that many of them, as you can see here, become military liege lords. And you can see this bishop here, dressed in religious gear, but also has chainmail on. Looks more like a warrior. The other side of this is the parish priest. These are the humbler backgrounds. These are the ones that have the most connection to the regular people. You could just see the difference in their clothing here. They tended to be little education. They taught Latin and Bible to the youth of the village, and that they were the closest to the people there. And then there's everybody else, those who worked. The lowest level side, the peasants, those who farm. Most practice subsistence agriculture, again, just what is needed to survive. Some were serfs, again, bound to the land. We've talked about these are people that grew out of the colony, and others who were tied to the land in the Roman times. They offered protection here, but they were really the backbone. This is the vast majority of it. I mean, we're talking, late as the 1700s in France, the peasantry or the lower classes, the commoners, anywhere 95-97% of the population. They are the vast majority of everybody. They work hard to cultivate their land. They're heavily taxed by the king, by the local lord, and the church, and required to give of what they harvested to the lords. This is an incredibly tough life, to say the least. Their lives revolved around farming. You kind of see this is how their lives, their yearly was organized around all these things. Most feast and festivals in the winter. In the fall, when there were less things to do, they were often, them working. These different festivals like preambulation, where a priest would go out and bless the fields before planting and harvesting. Then you would have harvest festivals, which is actually the origins of the American Thanksgiving, where you bring in food at the end and give thanks for the harvest festival. There, and similar in some ways to an Oktoberfest. Lots of, especially in the winters, you would have a lot more, when the nights are dark and long, you would have more sort of holidays and a feast like that to break up the monotony, like festivals of lights in the winter, which they still do. Take a look at the, you can Google some of this and you can see some of the different winter festival of lights that are still practiced around the world. All right, we'll pick up on this in the last video for this. next, and we'll start with women here in the medieval era.